one of the things I wanted to compare across the characters, and I'll go two, but I guess I'm saying ahead of time. One of the things I wanted to compare across the characters was the nature of their preparation. There are several. Let's make a spectrum. At one end of the spectrum, which all the way to the unrealistic point, make up whatever you want. Right, that would be one. The game master has no idea what you're going to make up, just says go do it, and will even maybe suggest the kind of game where there's a huge range of possibility. Right, if there are four options and the GM says make up what you want, that's not very open. But imagine a, a situation with immense possibility, and you're just let loose to make whatever character you want. And then on the other ends, there is the full blown here's the character sheet, and the backstory, and the psychological profile, and the why they're here, and and get going. Now this seems like a really broad spectrum, and that you would think maybe intuitively that it would have consequences. The place on that spectrum would have consequences for enjoyment, for development, for all kinds of things. So let's just keep in mind that I think that's kind of a simplistic notion, right? From freedom to control, and obviously we want more freedom, that kind of thing. I think that's a little simplistic. I just think there is that spectrum, and let's think about where the characters we've talked about fall on it. I'll take the example that from the last year where I played in 17 sessions of a game called Legendary Lives, in which I played um, a character named Shining Star, who in that particular setting was an elf and kind of a spy kind of character. And as it turned out, because making up that particular character was extremely random, up to and including being an elf. I mean, that particular system, you roll your way through character creation almost entirely. And so this was very much there's one or two crucial decisions, but most of them you're rolling. So I ended up with a fairly elaborate, the game is built so you have a fairly elaborate personal backstory and a lot of interesting tensions with the character, but you didn't make up most of it, or you glued it your way, but the components you rolled. So she was just out of prison, and her hair was matted, her face was prematurely wrinkled, she was obnoxious, right? All these things were off of the tables that I'd rolled, and they were out of the life paths and everything. And not to put too fine a point on it, we had 3 player characters in that game. All of them were female, and all of them through the rolls came out very skanky. I mean, they were, one of them actually literally smelled bad, and they were all like just really sort of, you don't want to meet these women at the bus stop, and
Was the
so
gender also randomly determined?
gender was not randomly determined.
Uh,
And so, as it turned out, though, the reason that I enjoyed playing the character and the game went on much longer, actually, than any of us planned, was in my case, the character had a very short arc given her backstory, that was part of what was rolled up and clarified by me. And a great deal of it was resolved in the very first few sessions, partly because I acted very decisively on the backstory elements that came into play. And so, in many ways, the character was freed up. Her initial tensions and immediate dangers were effectively resolved. So, I was kind of like the first attention grabbing arc of the series, whereas the other characters' problems and characterizations developed much more slowly. So I actually got to be I got to kind of sit back. I was involved in what was going on, and some of my backstory and problems were still going, but they weren't coming in on me as dangers anymore. And I could just more or less like have opinions on their problems. and I could have actions that were sort of taking part in their problems. And so it was I found it very freeing to actually have the immediate danger drama spotlight on me briefly and then off me. And now I got to be I had the fun of being the character actor instead of the star, instead of the focus of attention. I could just be in the story and have impact and have opinions in a big way, but not but my sort of little ethical arc was concluded. Basically, I shot my ex-boyfriend and helped out my sister one time and got the silver bow back to the sacred grove of the elves and got the curse lifted off me. And, that's 4 sessions in. So good. All right. Now I'm free. Now I'm good. And so, and Shining Star was an extremely hardened character, and in many ways was had one virtue, that she loved her friends, and really nothing else. I mean, there was really nothing else particularly ethical or nice about the character at all. And so I got to play a kind of a bad chick with a bad attitude who stuck by her friends and had opinions, and I enjoyed that immensely, being the freedom to just have opinions and do things without it being, oh my God, where am I in the rising action of my conflicts, or some complicated stuff like that. So I mentioned it for Shining Star. The game was set in the sketchy universe of the game setting, which is a fairly kind of cartoony, but somewhat more sophisticated than it looks, fantasy setting. Shining Star was rolled almost completely randomly, and the other 2 characters were as well. But you have to make decisions with what is randomly handed to you that very consistently in that game make an extremely powerful, problematic situation for you. So you do walk in with a situation for your character that you feel a lot of ownership over and a lot of vulnerability over, because your character's in trouble. So that's how those characters start. There's a weird combination of, hey, no fault character creation, just give me the dice, but it's very much yours at the end of, no one else's at the end of that. How did the other characters get made? I'm interested in Manus in particular. Was this character handed to you as a convention one shot?
No, we made him at the table, and we had choices of like we had a choice of a goal, and there wasn't that much background before. In that game, there wasn't much background before you actually got into the game. So the way it was set up, all the dramatic stuff happened in the once play began. So there was a goal, there was some story with there wasn't that much. There wasn't that much there with regard to backstory before
so the
play started.
It was that you talked about, that was pretty much just all you?
Pretty much. I mean, the goal I picked was I just want to live. Right. Mm-hmm. So, but then that changed right. by the end. Yeah.
Which is interesting because.
So it was pretty much all me. Yeah.
But Shining Star rolled that the thing she valued more than anything was friendship. That was a roll.
That was a roll.
Yes, okay. And as we played, we realized that a lot of the results of the rolls would have to change through play. They didn't have to be set in stone. So I actually did have the behavioral option of choosing to value something else or realizing that friendship isn't everything when it can be toxic, or when one of them is a werewolf murdering crazy lady, which was one of the other player characters. But she was really nice. She was my friend. But the point is that that I did have the option to change Shining Star's guiding value, but I didn't.
And
So
was there any, like, if you did change, was there any like game mechanical effect,
no.
or was it okay?
So anyway, what about the others? How did those characters begin? So going in order, I guess, Alan.
Well, it was Champions Now, so it has kind of a container that you start with, and the two statements that we had to reflect on. I had to work hard on relating to the ones that Rod came up with, because it was like martial arts, mythology, and something else, and then
Mayhem.
I do not remember. Mayhem
Monsters.
and
Monsters. Right.
And the second statement, I'm afraid I completely forgot.
Mm-hmm.
But we were stationed in Houston, so I spent a lot of time trying to find something to do with the mythology of the Southwest or anything, and failed to find anything that really juiced me. So I just went with an idea I'd had with Champions for a while. It's this, like, exploit the fact that the person part of the character can be defined without any kind of point cost or anything like that. So I just went for it to experiment with that. And at that point, then the game sets up a bunch of the situations, which in Hero System would be called disadvantages. But anyway, they're a mechanical way of communicating to the GM what you would like to focus on. So I was able to establish like two DNPCs, two dependent NPCs that I would have relationships with, and I framed them in a way that they had psychological drives that would make that I was interested in working with or off of. And then I think I just came up with a villain that appealed to me, that seemed to be mythological. And so there was a lot of putting out, here's what I want to play against. It was being communicated by the actual setup of the game. And let's see. So, and on the other hand, it left it, once I had the decision of being in charge of this huge corporation, I got to define how that worked. So am I completely committed to it? Am I not? How do I explain my superhero activity? So I have to come up with some reason for doing that. All this was left open to
with
me.
200 tiny points and a character creation system, which, in all fairness, has some similarity to a tax audit.
Tax. Oh yes, yeah. I had to focus. I had to.
But the point I'm making is that it has all these fiddly little points, but you have an immense amount of freedom to introduce not only things about your character, but things about the game world that are going to be involved.
Mm-hmm.
That's it's kind of interesting that Shining Star is completely built almost randomly, but the same effect occurs. You're handing the GM stuff that you own, right? You in terms of creation, you own it, but now it's theirs to own in terms of activity. So that's involved. Whereas Manu's character, that's not really all that involved, right? I mean, you had a role that you chose, but pretty much you could fill it with whatever you want, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh, but now that I think about it, that is the same. Now the GM has to cope with something that they didn't make up. That's what I'm seeing here. The game master is coping with things and has to own them. In terms of like what your character does, that they can't control or dictate.
That's right.
Right.